Chaksurin Miritam Yanatashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yanabhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Danati Swaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Siyata Parakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Stha Sri Rupam Sagaditam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Vivishakan Vitam Stam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kantara Kanta Namostate Jayatam Surado Pango Mama Mater Matergati Matsavasya Parambo Jodata Madana Mohanam Sriman Rasa Rasaram Bamsi Pada Karsan Panashanurpago Gopanata Sriasiram Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpadrumada Srimad Radnagana Shima Shanishto Shri Sri Radha Shira Govindadeva Prasadavihi Seva Manushmanami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Taya Chadjagati Taya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Gudajaja Mangalam Panadi Kaksho Mangalayatano Om Narayanaya Vidmahi Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tano Vishnu Prachodhyate Om Mahadevi Cha Vidmahi Vishnu Padnita Dhimahi Tano Lakshmi Prachodhyate Mahalakshmi Namastabhyam Namastabhyam Sare Sare Hari Priya Namastabhyam Namastabhyam Deadide Tapta Kanchana Gonangi Radhe Vindavanesari Vishavanasute Devi Pranamani Hari Priya Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pishtaya Bhutare Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pachani Nirvishesa Sanivadi Praskata Deyasadharine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Thanks for your patience. We had none of the troubles today that plagued us yesterday. I'm sure you've all had that happen. After an extended period of time, 1 or 2 years, all of a sudden you do something you've done 100 times before. It's automatically opened up. And now the app wants your password. And you haven't used your password for 1.5 years, so you don't know what it is. You enter the password. It says this password was changed 8 months ago. So it's 7:30, time to begin your Facebook cast, and you have to reset your password. I tried to switch to my phone. The phone was oriented so that it's showing from the back, and then when I tried to switch it, it just froze. So we just kind of saw the writing on the wall as far as yesterday was concerned, and we postponed our discussion till today. So thank you for your patience. Thanks for joining us, Manasaganga, Rob on Zoom, Gary, Montana, Brent, Govinda Dev, and Bhai Bobby Devi Dasi, my better half. We're on the advice that Bhisma gave on the bed of arrows to his wards, the Pandavas. They were standing nearby with tears in their eyes. Bhisma had been the closest thing to a father to them throughout their entire lives. Their father, as you know, had passed away while they were still youths. They were taken to the palace and nominally put under the care of Dhritarashtra, but Dhritarashtra favored his son, Duryodhana, didn't much care for the Pandavas at all. So it was Bhisma who trained them, who taught them, who tutored them, who loved them. And now Bhisma, their anchor, their affectionate mentor, father figure, is perforated through and through. Every square inch of his body has arrows. He's lying on the bed of arrows. He'd been given the benediction by his father Santanu that he could leave his body at will. Information that I have is that he was 256 years old at this time. He's waiting for the sun to transfer to the, let's see, from the northern to the southern horizon. And in the meantime, all the soldiers, Bhisma is the last of a dying generation, and everybody who survived the Battle of Kurukshetra, who's now going to rule the world, came to Bhisma to find out how to do it. And we commence with this verse here. Tan Simratan Mahabhagavan Upalabdha Vashuttama is the best of the 8 Vasus, as we mentioned last time. His brothers had conspired to steal a Kamadhenu cow. Her name was Nandini. She was a daughter of Surabhi. She was owned by Vasishta. Being incited by his wife, the eldest of the Vashus named Ju, led up his brothers to steal, an unsuccessful attempt to steal the cow. They thought they could take the cow off. Vasishta had his eyes closed in meditation, but in mid-crime, Vasishta opened his eyes and cursed the 8 Vashus to take birth on earth. Of course, his brothers didn't have to stay very long, but he was particularly burdened with a long, long lifespan. He was born as the son of Ganga and Santanu. His mother took him to the heavenly planet shortly after birth. Not sure anyone ever had better training than Bhismadeva. The demigods themselves trained him up in all of the Vedic arts, politics, international diplomacy. Parasuram personally taught him the military art, and he was returned to his father only then, having achieved maturity as a young man. His whole life, with all of the arts and sciences, the expertise with which he was endowed, the diplomacy, the statesmanship, he could never exercise any of it on his own, for his own benefit. Everything about Bhisma, his whole life, was dedicated to others. 4 generations, he assisted his father in getting remarried and gave up the kingdom and gave up any association with women in order to assist his father. He assisted the father's sons by Satyavati, Vichittaviri, and Chitraganga. Then he assisted the Pandus, the whole generation of Kauravas. Now he's giving them his last and best advice before departing this world. He said, Yan Brajamanam Surujayava Sharbato, Trilakam Nanracham Hyasham, Nanbrajatam Jantushu Yasham, Vajanti Charanti Chataranchi Shmara. One of the prime qualifications for entering Vaikuntha, the self-effulgent, luminous, eternal spiritual planets, is that one dedicate one's life in the service of others. Those who act selflessly, ignoring the plight of others for their own benefit, are barred. They don't have the PIN code. They don't have the access code to the eternal spiritual world. Main qualification is giving up everything for others. Such people, and only such, are given access to the kingdom of God. Krishna himself set the example. Imagine leaving the idyllic Vrindavan, the cows, the cowherd maidens, his friends, his real eternal mother, Nanda and Yashoda, in order to come to Mathura. He had to kill Kamsa to make life safe for the Brijvasis. But once he arrived in Mathura, Kamsa was killed. Then his birth parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, insisted that he stay. On his behalf, they did the sacred thread ceremony. They, afraid that he would run back to Vrindavan, which is where his heart always resides, they sent him away to boarding school, the ashram of Sandipani Muni. Sandipani Muni taught him how to be a king. He'd been raised as a cowherd boy in the dust of Vrindavan amongst monkeys and peacocks and cows. But once he went to Mathura, he was never able to go back to that place and to those people who were always closest to his heart. In order to protect them from Kamsa, he had to go to Mathura and kill Kamsa. But once he left his home, Vrindavan, and gone into the big city, Mathura, he was never able to go home again. It's one of the greatest ironies of the pastimes of Krishna on earth, that Kamsa had imprisoned many, many rivals, many, many family members, held them captive for years and years and years. And when Krishna came and finally killed Kamsa. Everybody who had been imprisoned by Kamsa was released and free to go home. The only one that wasn't free to go home was Krishna himself. Krishna was never able to go back to Vrindavan. He had to continue as a king, continue fighting the forces of oppression, making the world safe for such pious devotees as those who did reside in Vrindavan. Now that Krishna has in common with his great devotees like Bhisma. Bhisma is such a great devotee that he's listed amongst the 12 all-time authorities, Mahajans. Shayambhu Narashtata Komara Kapila Shambhu Prada Janaka Bhishma Bala Vyasaki Vayu. There he is. That's the name of Bhisma. And the noteworthy thing about Bhisma's life is that he didn't take anything for himself. Every day of his long life, extending up to 256 years, he spent it for the benefit of others. He starts to explain. Now remember, he's shot through and through with arrows. So anybody who's shot even with one arrow would be totally preoccupied with their own pain. They would be screaming in agony, asking others to bring something to take the edge off. And yet, just like he'd lived his whole life for others, Bhisma didn't even mention his discomfiture. Everybody came to take all his life. People had been taking from him. So he's quite comfortable with that, used to that. He didn't complain. He didn't say, hey, can you guys just give me a break here? I'm covered in arrows. He continued. He ended his life as he'd live his whole life, counseling, trying to make things easier for others. Yudhishthira was beset by a great despondency, a great depression, thinking that on his behalf, all of the millions of soldiers have been killed. Bhisma is using his mind, his intellect, with great focus, with great clarity, in spite of the fact that he should be suffering unlimited physical agony. There's no sign of that whatsoever. There's no sign of self-absorption, self-pity. Rather, he's thinking of the best words to alleviate the depression of Yudhishthira Maharaj. He starts to tell Yudhishthira, we're caught in the force of destiny. You think that because you made this choice, there were certain consequences. If you'd made another choice, there would have been another set of consequences. Prakriti kromanani gunaika ahankara vimura kartahamiti maniti. Bewildered by the false ego, the living being thinks himself to be the doer, when in actuality, everything's done by the Supreme Lord, who appears to us as Kala, eternal time and eternal destiny. I shared a verse the other day. Sometimes if you've ever twirled around or been spun around, or every once in a while during kirtan, devotees will lock hands and they'll spin each other around with centrifugal force. If you do that a few circuits, it seems like the whole temple room, the whole ground is whirling. But actually, that's all happening in your mind. The earth is not whirling. It's only happening in your mind. But when we think that we're doing stuff, that we're the cause of actions, the cause of certain results, that's only the mind. That's only a proclivity of the mind. The actual cause is Krishna. There might be an immediate cause, but the remote cause is Krishna. Bhisma reminds Yudhishthira of what he should already know, but which he has temporarily forgotten, that the remote cause of everything is Krishna. Otherwise, you've got King Yudhishthira, the son of Dharmaraj, the Lord of Death, the Lord of Justice. You've got Arjuna, the son of Indra, the heavenly king. Bhima, the son of Vayu, who's the best fighter with a club and who possesses the strength, 10,000 elephants. Arjuna wields the Gandhiva bow the bow which has never been defeated by battle. And above all, you have Lord Krishna driving the chariot of Arjuna. So considering all these material and spiritual resources, how is it that so many reverses came upon the Pandavas? And the answer is, it was the unchangeable, undeviating power of destiny, overriding the power of pious acts, overriding the power of personalities, overriding the power of expert management and the power of weapons. Under the direct supervision of Lord Krishna, the Pandavas suffered so many practical reverses. The only explanation is it was the influence of Kala, or inevitable time. Kala is identical with the Lord himself. So Kala, or destiny, or fate, as it is sometimes called, represents the inevitable will of the Lord himself. So Bhisma is telling Yudhishthira, you're not the doer, you're not the controller. There's nothing for you to lament, when obviously everything that happened here was beyond the control of any individual living being. No one since the beginning of time has ever known fully the plan of the Lord, even though great philosophers, scientists inquire exhaustively. They are always and totally bewildered by the actions of the Lord, who moves in mysterious ways his wonders to perform. He plants his footstep on the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds, never failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his never failing will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are full with mercy and will break, and blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. It's useless to try to discern the will of the Lord. Even the exhaustive philosophical inquiries of sages who have tens of thousands of years of lifespan and intellects far more acute than ours cannot ascertain the plan of the Lord. It's simple. Best policy is not to ask why, but rather how, Lord. How, Lord, can I be an instrument in your plan? And the difference between the sufferings of the Pandavas, in spite of their righteousness and in spite of all of their good qualities, and the eventual suffering of Duryodhana is like the difference between what happens to an orphan and what happens to the son of a rich man. Both the orphan and the son of the rich man may be abroad, far from home, apparently on their own. But the difference is that the orphan is truly on his own. He has no one to especially protect him or look out for him or watch his back. Whereas the son of a rich man, he may apparently be adrift and alone in a foreign country, but the rich father has always provided for somebody, maybe from a distance, it may not be very obvious. Somebody is designated by the father to keep an eye out for his son. And so the son of the rich man always has that mantle of protection, whereas the son of the orphan has nothing. The things that happen to devotees are enacted under the will of the Lord. They are tests. And in the short term, it may seem like the devotees are getting the short end of the stick. They're getting the worst of the bargain. They're getting deprived of their kingdom through the crooked game of dice. And in the short term, it seems like the wrongdoers, the miscreants, have taken the lead over the devotees and squeezed them out of what was rightfully theirs. But these challenges, these uncomfortable situations are directly enacted by the Lord in order to grow up and mature his devotees, to make them better versions of themselves. The comforts that the Lord leverages his devotees out, this comfort situation is never conducive to maturity, is never conducive to elevation, to rising higher. Neither is it safe. We live particularly in this modern age, in a time when everybody wants comfort. How many hours do we spend sitting? In fact, your computer, your phone will tell you, there's an app that'll tell you how much screen time you've had in the past week. And those statistics, frankly, are quite embarrassing for all of us. How much time we've spent on the screen, scrolling, dilly-dallying on Facebook, surfing the internet, most of the time while sitting down in the comfort of our air-conditioned, centrally heated homes, many never venturing out to see the light of day. And we think we're safe. We think we're avoiding risks in this sheltered, insulated, so-called modern lifestyle. But can I tell you, the riskiest lifestyle is sitting in a chair at home. It's true. Statistics show that there's nothing which is more likely to reduce the quality of your life as well as the quantity of your life than sitting down. Even office workers are exhorted to stand up and walk around at least once an hour. The longer you sit down, the more likely it is your blood is going to thicken, you're going to get blood clots, your muscles are going to get flaccid, your heart is not going to be challenged, it's not going to strengthen and meet the stresses that it should be able to meet. Now, oftentimes, the safest lifestyle is, in fact, the riskiest lifestyle. Look at Bhisma. His life was full of dangers, full of risks. He put himself constantly on the line for others. Tarapashrita girasha hashanir vimukta sangha mana avarish krishnala shat pita pate chodabush purash dita minita dikvyararaya. Everybody noted, everybody acknowledged that while Bhismadeva was speaking on the bed of arrows, that he was one who had spoken thousands and thousands of words in his lifetime, full of thousands and thousands of meetings. He had fought on thousands and thousands and thousands of battlefields. He had defeated thousands and thousands and thousands of opponents. His life was full of risk, and yet here he is at 256 years old, shot through and through with arrows, and still he's not leaving his life. Why? He's able to maintain his life, to live out the full range of his lifespan, because he's right in the middle of what the Lord wants for him. He's fulfilling the mission of the Lord. And as long as he's doing that, then the Lord will maintain and award the full span of one's life. Well, true, if Bhisma was fulfilling the mission of the Lord, why did he fight against the Lord at the Kurukshetra war? There are many reasons, but one good reason is that the Lord wanted to show that when the devotees' time has come, true, they were dispossessed. They were exiled for 13 years. But during that time, they grew, they matured, their faith in the Lord increased. And when the 13 years was over, the Lord made it his personal business to reinstate them in the throne and to annihilate the enemies. In spite of the fact that the greatest warrior of the day, Bhisma, was fighting on the opposite side, Krishna is sending the message that when the devotee's time comes, no one can stop it. Not even such a venerable, experienced warrior as Bhisma. There was no one, including Arjuna, who could match Bhisma on the battlefield. As long as he remained standing, he took out 10,000 Pandava soldiers every one of the 10 days that he fought in the 18-day war. And yet, eventually, by the arrangement of the Lord, Bhisma was felled and lay on the bed of arrows. It shows that when the time of the devotees come, nobody can stop it. Nobody can stand in the way. Bhismadeva was serving the purposes of the Lord by opposing the Pandavas in such a way that the Lord could show his power in a greater way. His life was full of risk, stretched himself all the days of his life for the benefit of others. And yet he had this full span of his life given to him. He was the one to whom all the survivors of the Kurukshetra war went to for advice, consolation, and counsel. So I was thinking about this, a kind of a crude modern example comes to mind. I don't know if you've ever heard of Louis Zamperini. There was a movie. I didn't see the movie. I did read the book made about him called The Unbroken. The movie was made by Angelina Jolie. Now, here is a man who should have died any number of times, but because it was God's plan that he end up as a Christian missionary, and that all of his tests throughout his whole life would become his testimony. So when he went to schools and talked to young people, he would have had the power, the background, and the experiences to really, really make an indelible impression upon them. So his parents were Italian, as you could discern from his name. They moved from New York to California when he was only 2 years old. They spoke not a word of English when they moved to California. And so because of his smaller size and his immigrant status, he was bullied in grade school. As a child, he almost died twice, once due to a house fire and another from falling into an oil rig and almost drowning. He got very good at fighting and boxing. He got off track, misbehaving in a number of different ways. When the family had moved to California, they moved to Torrance. He went to Torrance High School. And to stop him from getting into trouble, which he was constantly doing, his older brother, Pete, suggested that Louis get involved in the school track team, where Pete was already a star. So Louis managed to channel all of his potential for getting in trouble, for mischief, into becoming a great, great track star there in the California high school, secondary school level, won all kinds of records and state meets and trophies, came to the point where he thought that he would go to New York and try out for the Olympic trials. He was only 19 years old. His father worked for the railroads, and so he got a free railroad ticket to New York, where he tried out for the 1936 Olympics. Now, it so happened that when the Olympic trials took place in Randall's Island, New York, there was a record heat wave. Many of the competitors collapsed during the 5,000-meter race. 40 people died from the heat in Manhattan alone during that week. In the sprint to the finish line, Zamperini finished in a dead heat tie against the American record holder, Don Lash, and qualified for the 1936 Olympics, which were being held, guess where, in Berlin, Germany. At 19 years of age, he was then, and to this day remains, the youngest American to have ever qualified for the 5,000-meter race. Now, neither he nor Lash is considered to have had much chance of winning the 5,000-meter race against the world record holder, Lauri Lehtinen. The trip to Europe involved a 6-week boat trip across the Atlantic. Zamperini was a Depression area kid who had never had a sandwich at a shop. He'd never been to a drugstore or a convenience store or a fast food store for a sandwich in his life. When he got on the boat, like several of the other athletes, saw all this free buffet food, he would gorge himself every morning, gained 12 pounds by the time he'd arrived in Europe. Nevertheless, when the race started, he remained competitive. He came in 8th altogether. But what was interesting was that he did the last lap in 48 seconds. It was the fastest single lap of any competitor. His achievement of doing the last lap of the 5,000 race, and it was in 56 seconds, It was enough to catch the attention of Adolf Hitler, who insisted on a personal meeting. And it said that when Hitler met Zamperini, said, "Oh, you're the boy with the fast finish." Now, everybody predicted that at the 1940 Olympics, he would be a walk-in for the gold medal. That never happened, of course, because there were no Olympics in 1940. World War II happened. He joined into the Air Force. Another few brushes with death happened in 1943. He was on a bombing run in a plane called the Superman against the Japanese-held island of Nauru. Zamperini was the bombardier. On the way home, their bomber was attacked by several Japanese Zeros. 5 of the crew were wounded, one of whom died. When the plane skidded to a stop with flat tires, there were 500 shell and fragment and bullet holes in the fuselage and tail structure of the 4-engine bomber. Another narrow escape from death. Later on, his crew was sent out to search for another crew that had gone down in the ocean 850 miles south of Hawaii. This current plane had mechanical failure, and it crashed in the ocean, killing 8 of the 11 crew members. So Louis Zamperini, with 2 other crew members, one of whom died eventually, spent 47 days adrift on a life raft with hardly any food or water. And finally, they reached the Marshall Islands, where they were immediately taken prisoners by the Japanese. Now, he was in captivity for 3 years, severely beaten in prison camps where the mortality rate was 70% or more. But the interesting thing was, because of his background as an Olympic athlete and because of his attitude, he was singled out by the prison guards for special persecution. And one prison guard, who was later mentioned by General Douglas MacArthur as one of the 40 top war criminals, was nicknamed the Bird by all of the inmates. And he took it upon himself to sadistically torture Louis Zamperini. The famous picture of him holding up the log was one of the tortures, the persecutions that the Bird inflicted upon him. Another time, in the company where Zamperini was interned, the Bird told every man of the company to come up and hit Zamperini as hard as he could. And if he thought that the person wasn't hitting Zamperini as hard as he could, then that person would receive a beating. So throughout the time when his plane had 500 bullet holes and he came back safely, from the time where the other plane went into the ocean, he blacked out while sinking down into the ocean and miraculously woke up on the surface of the ocean. All these times, and during the 47 days on the life raft, throughout the times of internment in the concentration camps, Zamperini had always subconsciously prayed to God that if you get me out of this situation, I will dedicate my life to serving you. However, when he finally got home, after 5 years of war and 3 years of internment in the prison camp, he had daily nightmares about the tortures from the Bird. He had strong, irresistible cravings, subliminally, to find them and strangle them and kill them and get revenge for them. This led to his drinking heavily in an effort to try to forget all of his experiences as a PO. He had a beautiful wife named Cynthia, who reached the end of her limits. She said she was going to file papers of divorce. One day, Cynthia heard about a new evangelist who was having a tent campaign in the Los Angeles area where they were living. She asked her husband to go with her. He flatly refused, said, "That's not for me, bunch of bunkum." She went to the campaign, came back. She'd gone ahead and taken the altar call, become a born-again Christian. She said she was going back the second day, and she asked her husband if he wouldn't kindly come with her. He absolutely refused. She said, all right. But what she had decided at that first meeting was that she would not divorce him. part of her transformation as a Christian involved her forgiving him and agreeing to give him a second chance. He was so impressed by this that he decided to go to the church meeting. And at that meeting, Billy Graham talked very persuasively and powerfully about the need for forgiveness. He reminded Zamperini in that tent in Los Angeles about all the prayers that he had tendered while he was drowning, while he was being shot at with machine guns, while he was being persecuted by the Japanese and starved and worked to death. How many times that he said to God, if you get me out of this, I'll dedicate my life to your service. He was reminded of that during that revival meeting. Eventually, long story shortened, coming to an end here, Billy Graham helped Zamperini launch a new career as a Christian evangelist. Rather than being unforgiving, he adopted an attitude of forgiveness and eventually went back to Japan, visited many of the guards from his prisoner of war days and let them know that he had forgiven them. He even went back to the prison where he was interred and expressed forgiveness to the guards there. He was very active in the mission of spreading the gospel. He visited many, many high schools, elementary schools, and with his experiences, it is said that your test becomes your testimony, your message become your message. So he was a great advocate for a God-centered life. Although he had come to the brink of death many, many times, God awarded him the full duration of his life. He had actually been declared dead. The Japanese had not submitted his name as a prisoner of war. His parents had received a telegram from the Department of Defense that their son was missing and likely killed in action. It wasn't until he was returned to America that his parents and relatives realized that he was still alive. It was as if he would come back from the dead in 1944, and far from having been killed in World War II, it wasn't until 70 years later that he died of pneumonia at his home in Los Angeles. He was 97 years old, and at the time, he was learning how to skateboard. What is my point? Why have I taken up the bulk of our time this morning with this parallel story? Certainly, Zamperini didn't have the aristocracy. He didn't have the divine parentage that Bhismadeva had. But what he and Bhismadeva had in common was, for the sake of the Lord and for the betterment, ultimate benefit of others, they laid their lives on the line over and over and over and over and over again. And Krishna likes tash, nacha tajman manusheshu kashtin mepira bhavita nyachane anya priyataru. There is no one in this world more dear to me than those who take risks, who get out of the comfort zone, who get out of the boat in order to spread my glories. Those experiences that devotees have, which are out of the ordinary, supernatural, are the tender by which they gain more ground for the kingdom. So whereas the lifespans of Duryodhana, Sakuni, Karna, Dushasana, these were all highborn, aristocratic young men in the prime of life, in the peak of health, with the best food, the best training, the best physiques, the best protectors, the best army around them, the best weapons. But because they did not get in the middle of what the Lord's idea for their life was, they did not get to live out the full span of their lives. It's particularly and pointedly said in this first canto of the Bhagavatam that Krishna shortened the life spans of the opposite party by glancing over them. Simply by his glancing over the ranks of the enemy, their lifespans were cut short. Krishna had decided that because of their ill deeds, they were going to lay down their lives there on the battlefield of Kurukshetra and not go back home, back to their parents. And in contradistinction to that, Bhisma had been prepared to lay down his life on numerous occasions. He had fought thousands of battles against thousands of men for a long, long lifespan, and yet he always enjoyed the protection of the Lord. He was always in the middle of doing what the Lord wanted for his life. And the reason that even though being penetrated with arrows, he did not leave his life. The reason that the Lord tacked on even extra days on top of his already long life was that the Lord wanted Bhismadeva to see the ultimate victory of the Pandavas. Bhismadeva was like a father, and even though he was obliged by circumstances to fight against the Pandavas, his innermost desire would be that the Pandavas would defeat their enemies and triumph. Bhismadeva lived long enough to see that happen. So even though he should have been in unprecedented, unbearable physical pain, fact is that Bhismadeva was very, very happy. He was very, very satisfied to see the triumph of virtue. He's very glad to see Yudhishthira on the throne, even though he himself had fought against him. Even a great fighter like Bhisma could not have won the battle of Kurukshetra because the Lord wanted to show that vice cannot conquer virtue, regardless of who tries to execute it. Bhismadeva was a great, great devotee of the Lord, but he fought against the Pandavas by the will of the Lord because the Lord wanted to show that even a fighter like Bhisma cannot win if he's on the wrong side. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So it was a day late coming, but we finally got our technology all properly working and delivered the message of Bhisma/Louis Zamperini. I did happen to see a short movie about his life on YouTube. I think it was called Captured by Grace. It's produced by the Billy Graham Missionary Group. It's a good, very, very inspiring. I thought of maybe sharing it with you, but just as good that I could narrate the story to you as well. So appreciate Manasa Ganga join us, Gary Montana, Brent, and Bobby, all from the very beginning, Govinda Dev, Rakesh. Rakesh says, what a beautiful and inspiring story. Yes. And Rob, have you got any comments for us here, my Zoom buddy?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. That was a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. And as for takeaways today, if you want the code, take the higher road. Stop this, excuse me, stop the scroll, play your role. Even if the odds are long, with Krishna we can finish strong. Vice does not conquer virtue. And if you're on the wrong side, victory will be denied.
Wow. You know, I think you actually listen to these talks.
I try to. They're well worth listening to.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I have to share with you, if you weren't personally present, it was a wonderful celebration of Gita Jayanti on Saturday night at Salt Lake City. It was a reading of the whole Gita from 3:30 to 6:30. Omkar gave a wonderful talk on stories from the Mahabharata. There were kirtans by Kapil Sharma's kids, Isha and Vanita. Kapil gave a talk called Bhagavad Gita, a book of transformation, which was a very well prepared, very well delivered talk. About 100 people in attendance, I'm told, with a wonderful feast afterwards as well. So thanks to all those who prepared. We're going to meet with our Tuesday night conference call and list down all the people that had something to do with that. Everybody who went also got a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. Kapil Sharma has a Gita distribution program in place for that auspicious day every year. And so he sent me a bunch of pictures, which we posted on Facebook, of every attendee having ended up with a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. We celebrated a more sedate way here in Spanish Fork, but we also celebrated. This has been Transcendental Tuesday. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us, and hopefully these inspirational stories will stay with you throughout the day and provide good food for thought while we're chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.